Yeah, there's nothing like rain for putting you off photography. I came back to Spain a couple of days ago, 48 hours ago, and ever since I got back, non-stop rain. It's been absolutely diabolical. And I, it was kind of funny because I hadn't brought new kit for Christmas much. There's a couple of small things. But I was really looking forward to getting back to Spain, getting around the mountain in the normally beautiful light. And it just hasn't happened. It's been very disappointing, and it's really kind of thrown me off my stride. And what I wanted to talk about really was the ways in which New Year photography resolutions that we all love to set can become completely derailed, and before you know it, you've blown it, you're feeling angry with yourself, angry with the weather, whatever reason it's not working. And I wanted to look into that, and I'm not making any New Year resolutions in 2026, and there's a very good reason why. I wanted to talk initially about the gear trap, and I think we've probably all been there. It's that one piece of kit that makes my photography better. And it's inaccessible, it's too expensive, and there's a whole dance that gets done during which you persuade yourself that this piece of kit is really going to be the difference maker. And eventually you get the piece of kit, and you know, it's probably great technology, you probably chose wisely. However, the rub is that it doesn't immediately make your photography better. And I think we've all been through this loop multiple times. There's a sort of a rush of euphoria when you unpack the piece of kit. You know you've spent too much money, but hey, you know, that's life, we'll scrape by, we'll get it from somewhere. And you go out, you shoot, and after a while it sort of dawns on you that after you've shot a couple of hundred pictures, you realise that the ratio of keepers to discards is probably more or less the same as it was before you got the piece of kit. So there's a sense of disillusion associated with new kit, almost always. I can count on the fingers of one hand the pieces of kit that I've bought that have instantly and radically improved my photography. One exception to this in my mind was the Canon 11 to 24mm L super wide lens. That was something I'd coveted for years, literally, more than 5 years, and I've been sort of putting money aside to buy it and so on. But it is an extraordinary lens, and the quality of the pictures that I've taken with that lens have been absolutely outstanding. I think a lot of the images that I took in Valencia last year were with that lens, and absolutely superb. But it's not an everyday lens. Now, the biggest disaster I've ever had in terms of new kit is this. This is a gadget that on paper it should work. It should do a job, and it does do a job. It's an attachment that fits on the back of your screen and masks it, and you've got an eyepiece which is, wraps around your eye socket, a diopter, so that you can see the LED screen on the back of the camera in any conditions. And I must admit, I've never used it. It's too bulky, and it's tedious as hell, because you can't, especially in Spain, you cannot use the back of your camera as a means of working out whether the picture is good or not. You can barely see it. But this was a disaster. And I'd really be interested to know, what's the one piece of kit that you bought last year that you really don't think you've made enough of or got the value out of it. It's quite difficult to rank satisfaction, but I think my example of the Canon lens was a good one in that respect, because I think that was actually a good purchase, even though I've used it very little, because the impact on the photography has been enormous. However, we digress. So I think with gear, I think we're kind of cruising for bruising all the time, you know, and there is, you know, you can argue there is no such thing as too much gear, but actually I would argue the reverse. And I, over the years, have accumulated a lot of gear, and I've spent quite big on gear some years. And I can't say I've regretted it, because every little bit has inched me further along in the direction that I want to go in. And I think that's the key to the next phase of this discussion. What I want to talk about is that business of inching along to the next phase of where you want to be. The thing that we tend to do to drive ourselves forward is to have a big, broad goal, right? I want to be better at photography this year. And the buying of the kit we think is going to be an enabler for that goal. It very rarely is, because there's some cold, hard facts that we need to embrace, really, to make this happen. One is that photography is a craft. You're going to have to master the craft, and that is about understanding the way the camera works. It's about developing an eye for composition. It's about learning the software, and it's about moving yourself forward along a path. What this is about is replacing the goals with something else. Now, the first thing to say about goals is you almost always fail to hit them. So I could say, yeah, I want to be better at photography, but unless I put steps in place to make that happen, to move me along that path, then I'm really not going to get better at photography. The craft element brings us down to one thing, which is an absolute truism, which is practice makes perfect. You will not develop a photographic eye if you don't take photographs. It's the taking of the photographs, it's the generating of the hundreds and hundreds of bad photographs that we've all taken, that get us to the point where we can look at a picture on the back of the camera, or more likely when you get back to base, and say, you know what, that's not bad, I'm actually quite proud of this picture. And that's a real eye-opener. Now, what the other real eye-opener, I think, is, and I don't know the exact figure, so you'll excuse me if I paraphrase, but Ansel Adams reckoned that a good crop of photographs in any one year was less than 12. Now, he was in the business of film. He was a very, very deliberate photographer. He pre-visualized every photograph he took, and yet he still reckoned that a good catch was in the region of 12 pictures a year. Now, in our digital lives, we're used to shooting off hundreds, maybe thousands of pictures. We can come back. I very often come back from an expedition, an overnight up in the mountains, so I'll come back with several hundred pictures, minimally. I'm still faced with the reality that a massively high proportion of those pictures are not all that good. And I go through them with a fine-tooth comb. I discard what I consider to be the bad ones. First pass is getting rid of everything that's technically flawed. Second pass is getting rid of everything that's sort of uninspired or generally mundane. Third pass is weeding out the ones that you might actually want to keep for posterity, for posting on social media, for whatever purposes you want to keep it. But the thing that we've got to do is to work on defining that path, defining the thing that moves us forward. And I've got into the habit of accepting that I'm not going to, magic doesn't happen, you know, I'm not going to go out there and magically become a better photographer. What I have to do is to push myself out of my comfort zone and focus on some aspect of the photography that I want to improve. So my suggestions would be, and you can translate these into your own circumstances, what I would suggest is that if my challenge is composition, then I need to push myself into composing pictures as much as possible, because the act of composing a picture and the act of coming home and back to the studio, looking at that picture and realizing that it's not all that great, drives you into a place where you're going to look at photographs in the same style, or what you were trying to do, and start to analyze what made the picture that you found better than the picture that you took. And that may be a compositional element, it might be the way that the thing is framed, and there's a lot of detail that we can go into about composition, which I fully intend to embrace this year, but this video is not the place to do that. But the key to this is making sure that you do something more often, and that you do it deliberately, and that you follow through and you compare your results to what you were aiming for, and start to analyze, so that next time you go out you can say, I'm going to take the picture of the same thing, of the same scene, but I'm going to do it differently, and I'm going to have a different framing, a different look to it. And I think that's immensely useful. And I think if we take that right back to the roots of photography, it's it's grafting new habits onto old habits, or new habits onto existing habits, new patterns. So if you've got a dog and you take the dog for a walk every day, take the camera, take some photographs regardless of how bad the weather is. And I was quite gratified from the little shoot that I did at the beginning of the video to have one picture that I actually think is quite nice. So it was well worth going out in the rain and taking that picture. But it's a little microcosm of a germ of an idea. And I think that it's well worth doing this. So no matter what stage you're at with your photography, if you're just beginning, it's a case of take more pictures, build it into your routine. If it's a case of composition, it's take pictures repeatedly of the same thing and try to improve every single time that you do it. Try to get a different angle, a different take on it, and analyze ruthlessly what you come back with and how you can move forward. Now, this is a much, much better way of doing things than simply having a goal that says, I'm going to get better at composition. And the reason that it's a much better way of doing things is because you make progress for its own sake. So as soon as you start out on that journey, you are making progress. You're having light bulb moments. You look at it on the screen, you look at the sort of target picture that you thought you would take one like, and you start to analyze, and that is your light bulb moment. That is the bit where you say, if I framed it differently in this way, then next week we're going to get a better picture. And that way you're making progress every week. You're becoming a better photographer. We need to stay in touch with the reason that we started doing photography, because it's like an anchor. It keeps you on course, it keeps you moving smoothly forwards. And that's not to say that, you know, taking side roads, exploring different things and so on is a bad thing. It's simply that, certainly in professional photographic life, what tends to happen is people often get burned out because you get into a hamster's wheel, constantly running to stand still, constantly updating your social media, constantly marketing, constantly doing this, that and the other to move yourself forwards towards a goal that you actually forget about. And, you know, a few years of doing that, I think, as most professional photographers will attest, can be pretty exhausting. So I do think it's worth getting back in touch with what we came into this for. And for me certainly, coming to Spain, moving away from commercial photography towards landscape photography was something that really connected me with where I came in. Into this. It was landscape photography that inspired me in the first place. I was born and brought up in the Yorkshire Dales, stunning landscapes. It's given me something that I find far more valuable than doing a very glossy commercial shoot, no matter how rewarding that might be financially. And of course there is a real bonus in doing difficult stuff and doing it well. I think that brings its own reward too. So these things are sort of many and varied, but where I came in was landscape photography. And I think if I trace my arc, how I got inspired to even start doing photography with this Kodak Brownie that I was given for a birthday present. It comes from a place of trying to photograph landscapes in the beginning. And instead of playing games at school, I spent my time in the library reading all those beautiful magazines, Life magazine, Paris Match and so on, which were really, in hindsight, a golden age of photojournalism. A lot of the photographers that we now see as legendary were working and getting their work published in those magazines in those days, and the school library had subscriptions to all of these things for reasons that I'm not quite clear about, but it's a very good thing they did, because between that and the prevailing music that I was listening to at the time, it proved to be an intoxicating mixture. There was quite clearly another world that was more glamorous than the one that I was living in and more interesting. And that was really what sort of propelled me towards going to film school ultimately. Was really a desire to get involved in storytelling, get involved with the photography. I think it's an exercise that's well worth doing. The reason I think that is because if we want to enjoy photography for photography's sake, you've got to be anchored to the fundamental reasons that brought you into it, because, as I said, if you don't, you know, that way madness lies. Burnout is real. Burnout is something that afflicts all manner of people in all walks of life. But I think we can get very tied in as photographers to chasing something, whether that be success on social media or whether it be financial success or simply the approval of clients. It doesn't really matter unless we're in touch with the reasons that we want to get into photography in the first place. it's inclined to all go pear. And it doesn't really matter if you don't get the photograph. I mean, as long as you get some photographs, and the good ones will always come along. And so these things are, you know, practice tied to doing something regularly equals improvement. And that's the reason that I'm not making any New Year resolutions in any new year from this time on, because I sense that they will inevitably lead to disappointment. It's a way back onto a treadmill, albeit a self-imposed treadmill. And I think it's much more important to have a systematic approach, to be deliberate, and to enjoy our photography. And the only way that is going to happen is if the hard work is in some way moving us towards that fundamental urge that got us into photography in the first place. Okay, so that's why I'm not doing photography resolutions in 2026, and I suggest you don't either. Okay guys, thanks very much for watching, if you're still with us. If you've got a moment, apparently there's a hype button in YouTube these days, and I'd be very gratified if you found this useful, if you'd click that hype button, because that's one of the ways forward, I think, for YouTube in 2026. Alternatively, click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and there'll be another video next week. Thanks very much, guys. See you next Tuesday. Bye now.